Gamers, welcome to the supercut of Fighting Games Are Underrated. My initial vision for this series was to have one long video covering all facets of why I love fighting games, but for the sake of upload frequency, I thought it'd be better to break things up into separate videos and compile them together once everything was complete. I finished the series but never got around to cutting everything together until now. I'll have timestamps for digestibility, so if you've seen a part or two but not everything, it'll be pretty easy to skip the stuff you've already seen. But if you want to give your boy some of that precious watch time and watch the whole video, I won't complain. If you've already watched all 3 of the others, you're an OG, but there's nothing really new here other than some slight audio tweaking. And on that note, I was using a different mic and still figuring out post-processing when I first started this, so don't get jump scared when part 1 hits. Anyway, if you enjoy the video, be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe, all the YouTube stuff, but settle in, grab a snack, and let's talk about why fighting games are underrated.
If you walked up to someone on the street and asked them to name you an iconic fighting game, they might tell you to f*** off. But if they did answer, odds are that they'd either say Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat. These are both traditional 2D fighters consisting of good old-fashioned one-on-one combat along a 2D plane. Movement is somewhat limited to 5 cardinal directions, and rosters are filled with characters that have unique movesets and stats. This is the most basic type of fighting game, but just like Vanilla Ice Cream and Missionary, hi mom, basic doesn't always mean bad. Actually, quite the opposite. These are my personal favorites of the genres that we'll talk about. I got my introduction to fighting games with Street Fighter 4 back in high school, and they've always just felt kinda natural to me. Don't be fooled by their simple appearance. Even though these are the fighting game equivalent of a white girl wearing Ugg boots drinking a pumpkin spice latte,
you're basic.
There's still a lot of room for variability and nuance. Everything from the input for grabbing, movement options, game-specific mechanics, damage output, and how long the average combo is can all drastically change how a game feels and is played. You've got slower, more neutral-focused games like Street Fighter 5 and Mortal Kombat 11, but you've also got fast, in-your-face, unga-bunga games like Guilty Gear. Whatever your preference, there's likely something for you in traditional fighting games, and if you're looking for a way to get into fighting games but don't know where to begin, I would recommend you start here. Because of how bare bones they are, they're usually pretty easy to pick up compared to our other genres, and also tend to be more approachable for newcomers to the fighting game scene. Learning the basics of 2D fighting games will in some way help you while learning any of the other types of fighters, so they're definitely worth trying. Since there's a lot of carryover between 2D fighters and our other genres, we're going to be using them as a focal point as we talk about the others. Next up, we have team fighters. Team fighters are a pretty close subgenre of traditional 2D fighters and share many of the same principles and bases. Still 2D, still beating the life out of someone for seemingly no reason, but instead of one-on-one combat, now you get to choose a team of up to 3 characters. Doesn't seem like that big of a deal, right?
That is not correct.
For starters, in most traditional fighting games, matches usually play out in a best of 3, where after each round is over, health bars get refilled, and the next round starts over back in neutral, giving each player a few seconds to breathe before essentially starting back over at ground zero. You can use this time to analyze the previous round and plan accordingly. But matches in team fighters are last man standing, so if you want to win, you've got to knock out all of the other person's characters. After a character is down, there is still that brief moment of neutral, but a new character means a different playstyle, so it's not quite the same. This format can lead to some pretty hype matches where a player gets their entire team wiped by only one character, or the opposite where someone does a reverse sweep, knocking out all 3 of the other person's characters with their last remaining character. Combat is generally really fast paced in team fighters, which makes sense being that you've got to get rid of multiple health bars to win. And of all our categories, I find them the most enjoyable to watch. They're pretty much constant action from round start to finish, and there is so much cool shit you can do in these games. But all of that comes with the caveat that the well of knowledge that these games require is much deeper than our other categories. Learning matchups and perfecting combos for a single character can already be a pretty serious commitment, and now you've got to multiply that by up to 3. Trust me, nobody wants to be that dude that's really good at only one character, and when that character inevitably gets mixed out of their Jordans, suddenly looks like they've never played a fighting game before. Just choosing an entire team of characters that you like and fit your playstyle is a monster of its own, but that's not even all there is when it comes to team composition. Most fighting games have a meter system that's used to amplify special moves that extend combos or do super moves. And in team fighters, that meter is shared between your entire team. So characters that require a lot of meter to be optimized should be put in at the anchor position or saved for as long as possible. And characters that do fine without meter should be put in at point where they can hopefully build the meter for the rest of the squad. In games where you can tag in your characters, you also have to look at how well your team's assists work with each other. Assists might seem like they should be an afterthought, but a character with a good one that allows you to extend an otherwise undoable combo or keep block pressure going could easily be the difference between finishing off a health bar and hearing Guile's theme fade in. I know I probably just made team fighters sound really intimidating, and they kinda are, but even though there's a lot to learn, if you take your time and don't try to learn everything at once, you'll eventually get the hang of things. Plus, an upside to the more complicated games is that there's a ton of creative freedom and customization you have as a player. There are so many different ways and variations you could build a team in these games that you could easily spend 10 to 20 hours just testing out different team combos. So if you're someone like me who enjoys coming up with new combos and tech, there's a lot of fun to be had just in the training room of team fighters. Next, we have 3D fighters. Now we're getting to the weird ones. 3D fighters differ from traditional fighting games in that they introduce movement across the third dimension, or toward and away from the camera. Again, a seemingly small addition that actually changes a lot of how the game is played. In general, mobility has a huge impact on how games are played, and fighting games are no different. An extra axis really does add an entirely new dimension to the game. Pun intended, of course. While spacing is important across all fighting games, movement is more emphasized in 3D fighters than our previous categories, so these games tend to be a little more meticulous. Just look at how much micro-adjusting is happening during this professional match of Tekken 7. Now let's talk about how adding a third axis breaks a lot of the rules of traditional fighting games. In 2D fighters, if someone is attacking you, you can block it, jump over it, occasionally low profile, phase it, counter, etc. depending on your character, or you can take the damage. Probably try not to do that last one too much. But in 3D fighters, on the defensive end, you can sidestep an attack, sometimes creating an opening for yourself. And offensively, you can use sweeping moves to hit enemies that like to abuse sidestepping. The extra dimension also messes with special moves that are staples of traditional fighting games. Fireballs are great tools for controlling space and are usually done with a down, down forward, forward motion. But down moves you toward the camera in 3D fighters. See what the problem is? Tekken gets around this by having you double tap to move across the Z-axis, but even still, fireballs aren't nearly as effective because... As a result, fights tend to be a lot more up close and personal, and special moves are more commonly used by hitting combinations of buttons rather than motions. Stages and combos also work a little different in 3D fighters, and I'm going to talk about them together because they kind of go hand in hand. Where stages are 2D planes which essentially only serve aesthetic purposes in our previous categories, here they're more arenas and can be interacted with. As a rule of thumb, you don't want to be in the corner in any fighting game because characters almost universally get better combos when they have someone against the edge of the stage, but you really don't want to have your back to the wall in 3D fighters. The damage output of wall and stage transition combos can be kinda insane, and getting knocked out of the stage will instantly lose you the round in Soul Calibur, which has ring outs. In terms of actual combos, there's a lot more juggling in 3D fighters than 2D ones. This gives them a bit of an arcadey vibe to me, which I don't mind, but I do know people that play fighting games that don't like watching their character get ragdolled to death. I feel like whether you're getting comboed in the air or while standing, you're still getting your ass beat, but as a newcomer, it can be a little hard to tell when a combo is over and it's your turn. Usually in fighting games, once a character hits the ground, it means a combo is over, but not in 3D fighters. Again, mostly an aesthetic thing, but something to consider. Lastly, and I think we can all agree this is the most important part of 3D fighters, hitbox porn. Platform fighters are our final category and easily the most unique of the four. Often written off as party or kids games because of their cartoony art styles and how simplified they are, they actually have insanely high skill ceilings. Where the goal in most fighting games is to deplete an opponent's health bar, here your goal is to rack up damage on an opponent and send them flying out of a stage. Every time you get sent out of the stage, you lose a stock. First person to lose all of their stocks loses the game. Opponents are sent further as they receive more damage, so true combos can completely change based on a variety of things, like how much damage an opponent has on them, character weight, and whether or not you're in rage mode. Similar to 3D fighters, movement My bad. Movement is really important in platform fighters, but here there's a bigger emphasis on controlling vertical space. Excessive jumping is widely considered a scrub tactic in traditional fighting games and is a bad habit that most new players have. Jumping leaves you in an extremely vulnerable position, and good players will really make you pay for bad jumping habits. But in platform fighters, you can jump like Van Halen, Crisscross, Destiny's Child. I mean, it's right there in the name, right? Since you lose by getting knocked out of the stage, recovery plays a much bigger role here than in our other genres. Most fighting games have some sort of recovery option for when you get knocked down, be it an aerial recovery, teching, or delayed rising, though you can honestly probably ignore most of them at the learning phases of the game. But recovery is ingrained in almost every part of the game in platform fighters. Obviously, if you get knocked off the stage, you've got to make it back if you don't want to die. But even before that, while you're getting comboed, you can influence the way that your character will fall out of the combo, sometimes saving yourself from a bit of damage, and other times completely saving your stock. While you're on the offensive, not being confident in your ability to make it back to a stage after going deep for an offstage opponent can lead to a lot of wasted kill confirms. Of course, you're knocking on death's door every time you leave the stage, so don't get too greedy. As you might expect, stages carry the most weight in these games to the point where many of them will be outright banned in competitive play. Flat, static stages are universally accepted as the most fair and competitive, which makes sense. I mean, can you imagine trying to have a legit competitive match in this? Finally, I want to talk about a problem that's pretty specific to platform fighters. There's a single giant name associated with them being Smash. Look at how many more copies of Smash have been sold than any of the other fighting games that are prominent right now. This normally wouldn't be an issue, but a lot of people look at Smash as the end-all be-all of platform fighters and won't even give the smaller ones a second look, writing them off as Smash clones and not worth their time when there's already a godlike platform fighter. If this is you, you should really at least try some of the other games. Admittedly, I was skeptical about buying Rivals of Aether because control and game feel and gravity are really hard to fine tune, and I was a little worried that it would feel like one of those old Flash games. But dude, it honestly feels so good to play. It's definitely worth the price of admission. Hell, Brawlhalla is free. You literally have nothing to lose by giving it a shot. And as an added bonus, neither of these games have distributors that for no good reason try to gimp their competitive scenes like an offstage Little Mac.
Why are we still here? Just to suffer?
So that's cool. Keep in mind that these are just some of the different types of fighters. There are plenty of weird ones like Footsies, which is a completely stripped down, all neutral fighting game, and Lethal League, which is kind of like if Pong was a fighting game. All of this is to say that there's probably a fighting game that you'll like. It's just a matter of finding something that tickles your fancy. And since we live in the age of the internet now, you can pretty easily look up gameplay and tutorials for any game that you're interested in. Plus, fighting games go on sale a lot. A lot. So if you think you might like a game, but you aren't sure you want to pay full price for it, if you give it a couple weeks, you can probably get it at a discounted price. The next video in the series will be covering my favorite thing about fighting games, the characters. Despite how niche the genre is, fighting games are home to some of gaming's most iconic characters. If I played this sound clip,
Get over here!
even if you've never played Mortal Kombat, you probably know that that's Scorpion, or you at least think it's Sub-Zero. Many of these characters go all the way back to the earliest years of gaming, and for every icon, there are probably 30 characters that aren't widely as known but just as cool. Choosing who to pick up in a fighting game can be an extremely daunting task, but it's one of my favorite parts about learning a new game. You could potentially spend a lot of time looking at whoever you pick, so it's an important choice. I'm shallow like whoever J. Cole was talking about in No Role Models, so a lot of the time I choose my characters purely based on looks and learn how to make their gameplay work for me, but that admittedly is a luxury that comes with playing many games in the genre over many years of my life. Beyond aesthetics, I tend to gravitate towards boxing or brawler characters because I've always kind of been fascinated by the sport, but there are so many different ways you could go about choosing your character. I asked Reddit how they usually do it, and a lot of users said that they also go off looks, but some of them said that they account for archetypes and even personalities. That last one caught me a little by surprise since I mostly play fighting games fully muted while I listen to music or watch YouTube videos or streams on my second monitor, and I tend to be much more focused on the overall gameplay than the intricacies of each character during the match. Actually, let's talk a little bit more about character personalities. Developing distinct personalities in fighting games is a little special compared to most games because until fairly recently, most of them didn't have much in terms of story. You've got to remember that they originate from and still have a pretty significant presence in arcades, and there's no way you're popping a quarter into the cabinet to play through an entire campaign mode while dozens of people pile up behind you waiting to play their friends. Because of the backseat that narrative takes in these games, the way that most characters' personalities get established are through small animations and voice lines. I want to talk about the animations though, because I didn't really start paying attention to them until fairly recently, and they've quickly become one of my favorite parts about fighting game characters. Look at how disrespectful Ash's crouch animation is in King of Fighters 13. He is clearly not threatened by you at all. Personality aside, Baikon's forward walk conveys the same level of nonchalance, and you know all you need to know about Kano when you see this. It's easy to overlook small details like this in the heat of combat, but they really do go a long way in developing characters beyond their movesets. But back on the subject of choosing characters, as far as deciding specifically who you want to pick up, I'd really recommend that you just go for characters that you think look cool, either aesthetically or that you've seen or tried gameplay of and you think you'd have fun playing yourself. What you definitely shouldn't do is Google tier lists for whatever game you're playing and choose someone near the top, unless you genuinely like that character. Pro competitors will do this when someone is way overtuned and absolutely dominating the meta, but when you're competing at the highest level of play and money is on the line, sometimes you gotta throw fun out the window. Not to mention that since we live in the era of updates and patches, broken characters are constantly getting balanced and metas are always changing. You'll almost definitely enjoy your time with a game more if you're playing a character that you actually like versus someone who's strong on paper but you don't really vibe with. That being said, it is beneficial to try the entire roster. This way you can get a feel for each character's game plan and come up with ways to counter with your characters. It's also a good way to find characters that you're not initially attracted to. Laura has looked boring as hell to me since Street Fighter V launched, and I always felt like she was kinda just in the game for some TNA, but going through the character trials I actually ended up liking her quite a lot. I guess the TNA is just kind of a bonus there. I would also recommend that you really learn 2 or 3 different characters when you start a new fighting game, regardless of how serious you plan on taking it. Playing only one character can get a little stale once you start putting significant time into a game, and some characters are just hard to play against others. So it's always good to have a different character in your back pocket for the bad matchups. Especially from a casual perspective, getting completely stomped and feeling like there isn't much you could have done is a quick way to ruin the learning experience. Having a second or third character that covers your main's weaknesses not only makes certain matchups more manageable, but it can also help you learn the game's mechanics more effectively. My preferred playstyle is being right up in someone's face, and I like pushing buttons, as some of you more seasoned fighting game players can probably tell, so I tend to gravitate towards rushdown characters as I make my way through learning the roster. For me, this usually means learning at least one character with a projectile or some kind of space controlling mechanic for when I need to slow things down. Characters in fighting games tend to fall under archetypes, and who you end up playing kind of reflects who you are as a player and can influence how you learn to play a game. If you're someone who values fundamentals, you'll probably like Shotokan characters. Ones that tend to be jacks of all trades and masters of none. They usually have decent normals paired with a fireball, an invincible anti-air move, or dragon punch, or DP. These characters are the most beginner friendly as they don't usually have any glaring strengths or weaknesses and are good for players that are trying to get a feel for a game. But if you prefer to fight at a distance, you have zoners, characters that excel at keeping enemies away from them and controlling space. Zoners also have the bonus effect of mental chip damage on your opponents because beginners often see spamming projectiles as scrubby and nobody likes losing a fight that you can't really participate in. Or maybe you're someone that wants to take a more personal approach, putting the fear of God in your opponents as you slowly but surely inch your way into taking away 25% of their health bar with a single move. Or maybe you just like giving hugs. Either way, inner grapplers. Unlike zoners, these characters struggle to control all of the space that's not directly in front of them, but once they get in, they bring big damage to the table. Rushdown, puppeteers, trap setters, stance users, the list goes on. And there's kind of a nice rock paper scissors effect that naturally takes place between the different archetypes. There's an extremely well-made video by Ed Bencher covering all of the character archetypes that I'll link in the description if you want a more in-depth look at them. Of course, you can only have so many characters under each of the archetypes before they all start to bleed together, and this is where we get into gimmicks, character-specific mechanics that don't really follow the normal rules of the game. Things like Banjo's side B being an extremely good, borderline broken multi-purpose move with invincibility and high priority, but limited uses per stock. Banjo players have to carefully determine when the best times to use this move are because once it's gone, you literally are missing part of your moveset until you die. Do you save it as a recovery option or try to catch your opponent off guard with a random Wonder Wing? This is a pretty basic example, but some gimmicks can get pretty weird and complicated, and I'd probably recommend that you stay away from these characters until you're pretty comfortable with the game.
The town inside me and everyone's voice.
Next, I want to talk about guest or cameo characters. There's an entire hype culture around seeing the visual and gameplay changes a returning character goes through when they're announced for a new game, but these characters are hyped for the exact opposite reason. You never really know what gameplay for a guest character is going to look like until you see it. Smash Bros is the obvious example here since the entire roster is essentially all guest characters. Ultimate's final roster has 89 characters and only 3.5 of them are actually from fighting games.
I'm so damn confused.
It's really cool to see all of these icons outside of their elements and what core aspects of them are interpreted as being suitable for a fighting game. Let's look at Phoenix Wright in Marvel vs. Capcom 3. He's just a regular attorney with no real fighting ability in any of his games. His moveset consists of his iconic sneezing and walking toward his opponents presenting evidence. Now none of these sound like they'd be too useful in an actual fight, and you do have to suspend your disbelief a little with more creative characters like this, especially when he's in a game with someone that literally eats planets, but more non-conventional characters like this are always some of my favorites. You can also have interpretations of characters completely outside of gaming. I think it's so cool to get to control characters that you're used to just watching. Childhood favorites like Goku and Captain America can really be brought to life through the lens of gaming in a way that can't be replicated on comics or TV, and the competitive nature of fighting games provides its own special viewpoint on them. Like, who'd have ever thought that we'd get to see a 1v1 between Mikey and Bane? Finally, and I swear I'm gonna find a way to sneak this in all of my videos however I can, it's time for character customization. This is more of a recent addition in fighting games, and I'm all the way here for it. It's pretty standard for characters to have different colorways and sometimes paid for DLC costumes, but I'm noticing more and more lately that fighting games are adding more in-depth customization options. From character shops in games like Tekken to Mortal Kombat 11, which lets you go as far as to change your character's movesets, these are all welcome features in my book. Grinding for gear in particular is a mechanic that I really enjoy in the games that provide it. I feel like it presents a great alternate playstyle for people that don't want to fight others online.
Like the pimp says to his hoes, keep them coming.
That probably seems like a weird spot to end the video, but the next one is going to pick up right where this one left off, focusing on hype, which characters play a big part in, and the competitive nature of fighting games.
Anti-air, and then dashes into the fireball. In the front, he got him, he spends the critical arc, and Joe, he's got it.
Is going to advance.
No, he got it just at the end, and L.I. Joe takes it. He lives in the tournament. Small American representative takes out Ada from Japan.
You know what really sucks? When you're going off in a multiplayer game. You're hitting all your shots, you have great positioning, you are killing it, but your team isn't. We lost! One of my favorite things about fighting games is that that's not really an issue. It's just you and the other person, the better player comes out on top. No jet speaking dumb angles, no Yasuo's running it down mid, and most importantly,
No Johns.
because of how many moving pieces are in games like COD or League, most of which are out of your control, sometimes it's hard to even know why you lost a game. But since fighting games are one-on-one, it's pretty easy to look at losses and see what went wrong. If you watch a replay and notice that you lost most of your life to jump-in combos, you know you need to work on your anti-airs. There are even some fighting games that let you jump into a replay and see what you could have done better in a tough situation.
Oh, I could have air blocked it. What about 6P? Oh, what about DP? Oh, that was my answer.
In other competitive games where you can lose even if you played perfectly, losing can sometimes just feel like a waste of time. Like, what is there to improve on in a match where you dropped 50 but still lost? Again, not a problem in fighting games. There's always something to improve on unless the gap in skill is so wide that either player literally doesn't get to play. I'm much more inclined to hit the lab and find counters for something that I found oppressive after a loss than a win. And with the combination of the internet and fighting games becoming more accessible with things like in-game frame data, improving your game has never been easier. On the other side of the coin, winning in fighting games is also more rewarding than in any other genre, partly because of how much control you have over your character. Anyone can point a gun in the general direction of an enemy, spray, and get a lucky kill. But here, every move needs to be delivered with a purpose. To me, fighting games start to get really fun once you stop mashing and really start to think about why you're using the moves you are. The mental warfare and mind games are such an underrated and crucial part of fighting games that I don't think casual viewers really get, which is understandable because sick combos and flashy moves are what the eye sees, but this is what really separates the pros from the rest of us. Look at this clip.
Super great jump out of the corner from Phenom at just the right time. Here we go, command throw. Another command throw.
I feel like this is Something
Another
Phenom
command
loves to do.
through.
The fourth one, you never know.
Yes, there it is, the fourth one. He's done it. He's definitely done that to Daigo before.
So let's dissect what happened here. Daigo, who is arguably the LeBron of Street Fighter, got command grabbed 5 times in a row. And if you don't know why that's a big deal, it's because all he would have had to do was jump once out of the first 4 command grabs and he would have been rewarded with big damage. But if he guessed wrong and Phenom anticipated the jump, then Daigo gets hit with big damage. This is the classic non-mix-up mix-up. With every throw Phenom lands here, it makes less and less sense for him to do another one since it's so easily punishable. But both players know this and he uses this to his advantage, winning the round. Top tier competitive esports.
All on the line. Here we go. Make some noise, ladies and gentlemen. Grand finals. And you already know, if you don't know the rules, now you will know. Goichi has to win 2 sets coming from the losers in order to beat Sonic Fox. Sonic Fox, however, needs to win 1. So here we go. Oh, that was so loud. Talk to me. That was music to my earlobes. The people. Okay, here we go. Bandana for the family.
And that brings us to the hype section of the video. Whether you're playing or watching, fighters are easily the most hyped video games to take part in. You don't have to know anything about Street Fighter to understand how insane the atmosphere in the Daigo Parry video is. If you watch a professional match of Rainbow Six or Valorant, you're essentially watching 10 people do whatever the opposite of speedrunning is, checking every nook and cranny of the map until someone gets caught out. But fighting game esports are all action all the time. Even the extremely rare occurrence of 2 players doing absolutely nothing is still hype.
He's just standing there, menacingly.
From the playing perspective, there's very few gamer dopamine hits like completely downloading someone and perfectly predicting their moves, or finally hitting that combo you've been practicing in a real match. Lately, it seems like games are also adding a variety of mechanics that are almost purely meant to get people going in the middle of a match. Things like X-ray moves, tech and slow-mo, and drive impact collisions all serve as an oh shit moment and can momentarily spike overall investment in a game. Like we talked about in the last video, as new games and DLC gets revealed and released, there's an entire hype scene around seeing what characters make it into the game.
Oh my god! Okay, it's happening! Everybody stay calm! What's the procedure, everyone? What's the procedure? Stay calm!
Even for characters that you don't have any interest in playing, it's really cool to see what kind of visual and gameplay redesigns everyone goes through. If you had told people in 2012 that Guile would have a 40-hit combo in Street Fighter V that wasn't a super, I'm sure they would have told you to go home and be a family man. And yet, here we are. Seriously, go look at how many views an average character reveal trailer has for just about any fighting game. The level of hype and investment that these trailers generate very clearly goes beyond people that actually play fighting games. I'd be doing a disservice to the entire genre not to bring up the music created for these games. When you think of good video game music, there's music that's good for video games, and video game music that's just good. And fighting games tend to have soundtracks that fall in the second category. Like, I will actively choose to bump the Third Strike soundtrack on my way to work, and I'd bet every penny in my bank account that for every video I've created, fighting game music has been playing in the background during some part of the process. You've got character themes that fully capture personalities and stage themes that perfectly match environments, all while getting you in just the right mood to... I really like it when games go all out on one type of music, like the heavy metal in Killer Instinct or the hip-hop centered Street Fighter 6. I hate this character, but I gotta admit they popped off with Blanca's theme. This shit'll make a Catholic nun wanna shake some ass. Announcers also play a huge part in setting the mood for a match, and they do not get the love they deserve. I mean, listen to this.
Get ready for the next battle! Tekken 8! New challenger! Come and get some, I dare you. Marshall! Love!
I don't even play Tekken like that, and the way this dude has me ready to main every character they announced for Tekken 8 is crazy. And of course, you have the iconic
Finish him.
Imagine how much lamer fatalities will be without this. Actually, I'm gonna edit that in so you don't have to imagine it. It just doesn't hit the same, does it? You may have noticed that over the course of the series, I've been talking a lot about learning and knowledge checks and not a lot about sick combos and the required mechanical skills to perform them. And that's because honestly, with enough time in the training room, the execution barrier in fighting games generally isn't too much to overcome unless you're playing King of Fighters. And a lot of newer fighting games are even implementing simplified control options. Like we talked about earlier, fighting games are much more about mind games and analyzing someone's patterns and utilizing all of your tools effectively. This was initially going to be the final part in a 4-part series, but this video exists 10 times over and I don't want to make you guys wait another 4 months for it, so we're kinda gonna speedrun it at the end of this one. I'm gonna preface all of this by saying that there is no right way to learn a fighting game, this is just what works for me. With that being said, I thought it would be fun to actually learn a specific game for this part of the video, and kinda do a practice what you preach thing. I chose to learn Strife because I played the beta and loved it, but I never really got around to playing the game, and this just seemed like the perfect excuse. Also, before we get started, I want to talk about a problem that's pretty unique to fighting games. When you buy almost any fighting game at launch, you're basically paying more money for an inferior version of the game. It's inevitable that as more DLC gets released, there will be an arcade, deluxe, or ultimate version of the game somewhere down the line that will be cheaper and have more content. So why bother getting them at launch? Getting in early allows you to learn and grow with the community of that game. This drastically lowers your chances of getting bodied versus hopping in when the game's been out for a while, especially when player counts drop and the only people left playing have dozens, maybe hundreds of hours of playtime over you. Without even accounting for player skill, the process of learning a game is way more approachable when it's in its infancy. Street Fighter V launched with 16 characters, and after years of updates, now there are 45. So imagine how much easier it is to learn matchups of the original roster and only have to learn new ones as characters get released, than trying to learn all 45 matchups at the same time. Fighting games also tend to die out rather quickly, so the best experience for most people will be right when a game comes out. Just keep that in mind when you're thinking about the pros and cons of paying full price for an upcoming game. Step 1. Play the tutorial. This seems obvious, but I feel like a lot of people go straight into arcade or trials instead of learning the basics of a game. Even if you're a vet, the tutorial will teach you all the game-specific mechanics that you're unfamiliar with at this point. Strife's tutorial is actually really good and explained everything fairly simply. It even goes as far as to teach you counters for every character's main game plan. Step 2. Pick a character. I made a whole video about this, so I'm not going to get into specifics again, but I chose Giovanna for this one. She's who I played in the demo, and I've liked her design since the minute I saw her. She's also pretty simple, which I think is beneficial when you're learning a new game. I'm also interested in learning Happy Chaos, Bridget, and Biken for personal reasons, but they all seem like more advanced characters that would have made the beginning stages of learning Strife a little more difficult. Don't let that discourage you from picking a tougher character at the start though. Like we talked about in the last video, play whoever you want. Step 3. Character trials. I might get some shit for this because a lot of stuff in character trials isn't necessarily practical or optimal, but I don't really do these to learn combos. I use them more so to get a feel for a character. I find the structure of trials more beneficial when I'm learning combo routes and links than when I'm aimlessly just trying moves out in the training room. Strife doesn't really have a dedicated trials mode, instead leaving that in the player's hands. You can upload and download custom combos that other people have made, and I like this on one hand, but I wish the devs themselves had made 5 or 6 combos for each character along with this. It's kind of a jungle looking for practical combos in tech with the system they have now, but I remembered some of the combos from the beta, so I didn't have to dig too deep for this one. Step 4. Lab and play against low-level computers. Experiment with the stuff you learned in trials and try to come up with your own combos. The training room is going to be your best friend when you're trying to get those combos down so you can actually land them when it matters, but it's not the same as actually playing against a moving opponent, and this is where playing against the computer comes in. Fighting computers still isn't quite the same as playing an actual person, but practicing whiff punishes and spacing can't really be organically done in the training room. This is just to get your feet wet when it comes to real combat. Step 5. Play people or do some more single player content. Back when I was playing Mortal Kombat 11, I really enjoyed farming the towers for unlockables, and I don't think I ever actually played any PvP. So don't feel like you have to play against people to have fun in fighting games. If you do choose to hop online, don't worry about winning or losing. Like I said, going from fighting bots to real people isn't a direct translation, so there's gonna be an adjusting period and you probably will get bodied. Honestly, you should fully anticipate getting waxed, especially if you're trying to get into a game that's been out for a while, but just watch your replays and see where you can improve. Even if you spent 10 hours practicing combos and going through arcade mode, you won't have any real matchup knowledge. Like this. I didn't know what to do about this, but as the match went on, I learned that he could only shoot twice before reloading, and that was my opening. And boom, just like that, you're a whole ass fighting game player. Again, I can't stress enough not to worry about being the highest ranked player on the leaderboard or anything like that. You're gonna suck at first, and that's okay. I'm ass at most of the games I've had as background footage. Just play the game however you think is fun, enjoy the process, and you'll get better. Well, that's the wrapping and bow on my Fighting Games Are Underrated series. It only took me a year and a half to make 3 videos, but we got there in the end. If you've enjoyed this video or this series, don't forget to leave a like so it gets recommended to more people. And if you really enjoyed it, you can sub to the channel for more gaming content like this. Thanks for sticking around until the end, and I'll see you in the next one.